After a while, once you have some idea of an illustration in mind, you can ask yourself what this illustration accomplishes or will accomplish. Is it a joke? Is it a statement? Is it an opinion? I think one of the best things you can do with illustration is ask a question rather than propose an opinion or make a statement, because this invites the reader or the viewer to participate in it. And so you don't just agree or disagree, or you realize, well, I've seen that now. You kind of walk away thinking about that piece, and you continue having a conversation with the piece. Of course, when I have to do a quick editorial thing about a specific subject, it would be inappropriate to think about my conceptual ideas and propose grand questions. So a lot of times it is good to just find out the best way to communicate clearly. But in my personal work, maybe because of that, I go the exact opposite route and I try to be as confusing as possible. One way of approaching illustration is by thinking of it as a series of very carefully placed dots with no lines between them. And you allow the reader either to see it as it is, as just a bunch of dots, or to make connections between them however she likes. So a couple of words about inspiration. Raymond Queneau, the French poet and novelist, wrote in one of his journals, "The poet is never inspired because he is the master of that which appears to others as inspiration." Later on he formed Oulipo, which is a French workshop, translated as the Workshop for Potential Literature, where authors would come up with really convoluted and strange constraints to come up with startlingly original works. So Georges Perec has a novel without the letter E. Queneau himself has a book in which one mundane incident is retold about 100 times, each time in a different style. And that book particularly is called Exercises in Style. I think there's a lot we can learn from that approach as illustrators. The way you draw your thumbnail sketches is entirely up to you. They don't have to be clear, they can be if you want. But I would advise you not to go into too much detail, because you don't want to do the same thing twice. You don't want to waste your time on this. And you don't want to feel precious about them. So if you make a really nice drawing, it'll be harder to kill it. So once you've exhausted all your ideas, it's time to invite our inner critic back. And this is a time to be critical. You can look at all these ideas that you come up with and throw away some of them, maybe remix them, do whatever feels right. Also remember that our minds can naturally gravitate towards elegant solutions because we like a narrative in our lives. We never have a narrative, but we want to. I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of experimental art or experimental literature in particular is labeled as challenging or difficult, because it doesn't offer a sense of narrative, an arc from beginning, middle to end. Again, I recommend you to take a break at this point. It's good to come back and let some distance happen. I think idleness is really important to the artistic process. It's just as important to let yourself do nothing for stretches of time, because you are not doing nothing. You're actually constantly thinking about it in the back of your mind, and then when suddenly in the shower an idea pops into your head, out of nowhere. It's not out of nowhere. It's out of these idle hours that you spend walking around, drinking tea or staring at a wall. So once you have a good idea, you should look at it as a whole and also examine every element. So look at each separate element. Let's say you have a hammock, a hammer, and a ferret. You should ask yourself what each one of them accomplishes. If the answer to this question is not much or nothing, you should consider editing it out, or maybe merging it with something, maybe putting it in the background, or maybe leaving it there, but you should question this. So in editorial assignments for literature, for instance, there's a very common aversion to depicting characters. If you look at New York Times book review, they almost never see someone's face drawn in full detail. Well, why is that? Well, there's a number of reasons. I think most importantly, you don't want to tell people what someone looks like when they can imagine their characters. You can see that also on book covers. So the same principle applies to what you're doing. Is it a specific character that you have? If you have a character, how specific should it be? Does each element contribute something? Ask yourself these questions. So everything is constrained. Any commercial assignment is always constrained in one way or another. You always have a format that you have to stick with. Sometimes it's flexible, but most of the time it isn't. So it's good to learn to love this constraint and to get something out of it. For instance, a spot illustration is a good way to focus on one little aspect, a character or a detail, while a landscape illustration can allow you, well, a landscape. Or a portrait is good for anything that's vertically centered. Whatever you have, it's good to analyze what the format gives you and try to use it to your advantage. For a lot of artists, the sketches are always better than the final. It's a very common problem that students complain to me about all the time. And unfortunately, there is no solution to it. But I have a few hints and tips that might help you. So first of all, you might want to keep your sketches very loose. What happens when you do this is you're not tempted to trace, but when you do your final, it'll be more like you're still drawing, you're still coming up and improvising. You can also use the sketches as your final. In other words, you can just go straight to final from the sketch somewhere in a corner of a room or on your desk or in a different room, doesn't matter. In the back of your head maybe. Of course this is very stressful because it feels like you don't know what goes where, but it allows for a lot of improvisation and it is a lot of fun. Most importantly, nowadays with Photoshop, if you use that approach, you can mix things together. So if you have 2 or 3 attempts, you can take, let's say, a head from one of them and torso from the other and remove the legs altogether. Finally, you can mix this approach. So you can have certain details sketched out well. And this is something that I personally do. So for most of my sketches, I keep everything very loose, but then if there's a face that I need to get right, particularly if it's a portrait, I would make sure that the nose and everything is more or less in the same proportions that it should be. So then I can relax in some areas and I can be more precise in others. When you're working on an actual assignment, the sketches that you present to an art director should be very clean, very easily readable, unlike your thumbnails. And they should give a decent idea of what the final illustration is going to be. They shouldn't look like the illustration. You should remember that the art director hires you because she's more or less confident in your abilities. She knows that you can make a beautiful piece of work and you can dazzle her with all that stuff in the final. Right now, the main thing is clarity. This is optional, but I would advise to number your sketches and very tidily put little borders around them when you present them. This allows the art director to understand the format and where everything goes. And also under each sketch you can write very brief descriptions. So if you have a drawing that's a little loose, you can write an albatross flying into a wind tunnel, and then we will know what that is. You can also highlight your more conceptual metaphorical ideas there. The main difference between the thumbnail sketches you do for yourself and the proper sketches you present to the art director is clarity. You should remember that they usually are juggling 10 other assignments and they don't really have a lot of time to decipher your stuff, so you should try to be as clear and concise as possible, both in your emails and in the actual drawings.